Alright, this is the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. My name is Mahali Ryan. So the AITSL standards, today I'm just going to look at the teaching and learning. So standard 1 to 3 will be under example 1. So that's know students and how they learn, know the content and how to teach it, plan and implement effective teaching and learning. Example 2 will be create and maintain supportive and safe learning environments. And example 5 will be assess, provide feedback and report of student learning. So for the first example, I just want to talk about a Year 7 class that I had in my last practicum. So my supervising teacher was the main coordinator for the maths and science class and then that entire class as a whole. As a result, she was able to disclose information about the students' home lives, their capabilities, and even share results of a multiple intelligence quiz they'd done at the start of the year. So throughout my practicum, I encountered variation of capabilities in these students. As a result, I had to modify tasks to ensure I was facilitating their learning as effectively as possible. So by having that background information before I started, it meant I knew how the students learnt. So from that, I could understand, say, this student struggles with this, they learn better this way, they improve more with the usage of ICT, certain teaching strategies. So for an example, one of the largest difficulties I faced in that setting was, for example, a lot of my classes had a few SEP or special education program students. This meant I needed to modify certain activities and teaching styles to suit, but ensure at the same time that I was not neglecting the learning of the more advanced students. So not only did I have SEP students in my class, so students that varied from mild Asperger's, etc., but I also had students that had not quite red zone but very high behaviour issues. So that means not only was I trying to modify and differentiate tasks to how the students learn and accommodating their capabilities, but also having to encourage and ensure that I was still bringing about my behaviour expectations in that. So ways in which I accomplished this was differentiating activities and always ensuring I had an extra work prepared. In addition, structured group work was a major feature of my lessons where students were put in groups with the variation of capabilities. The results were effective peer tutoring with the advanced students would finish and then assist the not as advanced students. This particular strategy appealed due to the interpersonal learning styles of the majority of the students, which was actually just over 70% of the class was an interpersonal learning style. This particular one worked incredibly well. So 2 of my examples on the side modified stem and leaf plots worksheets for like a math lesson. So basically, even though they were working in groups, they had their own individual tasks to complete. So the more advanced students or the ones on like the medium to higher level were doing the more advanced worksheets, whereas the other students were doing the lower ones, and then they would complete those, check their answers, and then there would be a medium range activity on the board where they would work it through together. So by consistently having that extra work and understanding how each student learned, I was able to effectively structure lesson content that challenged each child. So not only did I need to cater for how the students learn and knowing how they learn, but also I had to know the content. So when I first started the science there, they were doing biology. Year 7 biology I obviously had not done for a long time. For example, there was dichotomous keys and I could not remember anything about it. So before I had those guys for those lessons, I made sure I knew absolutely everything I could about dichotomous keys, kingdoms, species, everything. Because I don't believe that you need to know how the students learn, you need to know the content, otherwise you cannot plan and implement effective teaching and learning. So by constantly having that extra work and understanding how each student learned, I was able to effectively structure lessons content that challenged each student. Though in order to achieve this, I had to be very particular about the organisation of my curriculum content and how I structure my teaching sequences. In teaching strategies I used, though, the most crucial component was creating these effective teaching sequences to ensure I knew the content that I was teaching. So I also have a modified lesson plan there just to show how I needed to differentiate not only worksheets but my entire lesson. So the second example is standard 4, which is to create and maintain supportive and safe learning environments. So during my classroom time, especially working with Year 7s, I found that the subject and the time of the day greatly influenced the students' participation and engagement. So for example, I would really drive to get my content lessons done in like the earlier lessons that I had in the week, whereas when it came to the afternoon lessons, they were a lot less engaged. So in order to combat situation and willingness to participate, I needed to create and implement lessons that encouraged inclusive participation for the entire class. So as I said previously, I had some students in there that had high behaviour issues. So definitely, especially in the afternoon lessons, trying to keep those guys engaged as possible so they didn't get distracted and disengage and start interacting with other students and preventing their learning. So making the most of the content-driven times that I could, as opposed to afternoon lessons where it'd be more group work, interactive ICT activities. So the best way I found to organise classroom activities was to make sure I had clear directions and instructions on the PowerPoint from the moment the class started. So not only having these ensured students had what they knew what they needed to be doing, but it also set the mood for the lesson. So students would be given, they would know what they had to do, they would know what their requirements were for the lesson before they even got in. They'd come in and then instructions would be clear on the board for what they needed to do. This also reflected what their behaviour objectives were, if you will, for that particular lesson, anything in particular they needed to work on from the last lesson. In a way, I made sure to manage the classroom behaviour. As I said before, I had some pretty hard kids to deal with. Was a traffic light behaviour chart whereby students' names were moved throughout the lesson depending on their individual behaviour. A student was consistently challenging throughout the lesson, they would be moved into the red light area where they would receive attention. However, the students that were really well behaved would earn points towards being able to do more ICT activities in those afternoon lessons. This approach worked incredibly well with Year 7s. So, for example, while they could be moved down into the red light area, they would still have to the end of that lesson to work themselves back up. So if they demonstrated incorrect behaviour at the start of the lesson, they could still work that back up. However, like as an example, we had some racial bullying in my class for one lesson, and that was an incident where the student would not be moved out of the red light area. I had to do a picture up of this one because the teachers actually wanted to keep it and I didn't have any photos of it. So that was good. And finally, my example 3, which is standard 5, which is assess, provide feedback and report on student learning. So to be able to assess and report constructively on student learning, teachers are required to identify, gather and interpret data concerning students' learning and development. This is done either via summative or formative assessment. So on my last prac, unfortunately, I was unable to be involved in the entire cycle of one summative assessment. However, I was able to assist in marking a maths exam and giving feedback, as well as being able to introduce and implement a multimodal history research presentation and assist students with ongoing science comprehension assessment. I was fortunate enough to be involved in the moderation of marking a maths exam, which allowed me to see how my interpretation of assessment criteria corresponded with other teachers and allowed me to give improved feedback back to students. The part of this that was so fantastic is the fact that I had those students for the couple of weeks before they had their exam, and then I had them for a week after. So I could see through their exam parts where I had taught them and whether they did well and responded really well with how I was teaching, my different strategies and different ways I made the class more interactive for them, whether they were more engaged. And then I could take that information, what worked, what didn't work, and bring that into that last week, which was just fantastic. While I gained experience assessing, providing feedback on assessment tasks, I additionally participated in formative assessment and constant feedback in the classroom. So even if it is you're doing so great on this task, you could do it more this way, that way, marking homework, etc. So feedback is not only essential for students, but in order to ensure the learning styles were catered to and engaged in, I deliberated with my supervising teacher at the completion of each lesson. So by assessing and reporting student learning, I was able to understand the strengths and challenges. Again, with this particular class, I had that extra insight into how the students engaged with different lesson topics, different content, how it was taught, group work, ICT, individual learning. So by assessing and reporting student learning, I was able to understand the strengths and challenges. This allowed me to make more adjustments and create appropriate lessons. So just there I have a Year 7 revision sheet. So with the assessing and reporting, it was such a fantastic experience to be able to go through that and be able to make consistent and comparable judgments, especially with that moderation, was fantastic. I got to interpret how the students' data was and modify my teaching in that, because I did have that extra week.